She accidentally walked into her husband's second wedding with their twins, and she slapped him in front of all the guests. Then, "Hi, my most precious, deeply respected, and endlessly loved family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Each of you is a blessing in my life, and today, as we celebrate 24,000 hearts joined in love, I bow to your loyalty, your patience, and your faith in me. You didn't just follow a story, you became a part of my soul. To my new family members, don't walk away too soon. Please stay till the end. Let your heart feel what thousands before you have felt, something rare, something real. Trust me, even once. To my old warriors, my loyal lights, share in the comments how much this family means to you. Your words are a shelter for those who are just arriving. Don't wait for me to ask. If my voice still reaches your heart, if this love still lives between us, like, comment, and say with pride, I am here, and I promise you from the deepest place in my heart. Chapter 10 will be unlike anything you've ever seen. The ending will not just surprise you, it will stay with you forever. Now let me pray for your heart, like I always do. May your days be wrapped in peace, your nights touched by kindness, and your life surrounded by people who see your worth. May your heart always find warmth, and may love meet you wherever you go. This is more than a story. This is family. This is love. This is forever. And if you feel it too, say it once with your whole heart. I am here. The Tuesday evening light filtered through the French doors of their Westchester home, casting long shadows across the marble kitchen island, where Natasha Big Dan Stroud arranged white roses in a crystal vase. She hummed softly, the melody floating through the house like a prayer of contentment. In 30 minutes, Alex would walk through that front door, his tie loosened, his smile warm with the promise of another perfect evening. 8 years of marriage had taught her the rhythm of his days. Coffee black, no sugar, shirts pressed with military precision. A kiss goodbye that lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough to show affection, brief enough not to disturb his morning routine. She had choreographed her life around these small certainties, and they had become the foundation of her world. Mommy, Grace is hogging the PlayStation again. Emma's voice rang out from the family room, followed by the thunder of 7-year-old, feet racing down the hardwood hallway. Emnot, you had it for like forever! Grace's voice pitched higher, that particular note that meant tears were imminent. Natasha smiled, setting down the last rose. These were the moments she treasured most, the beautiful chaos of family life, the sweet disorder that meant her house was truly a home. She walked toward the family room, her heels clicking against the floor in a staccato rhythm that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Ladies," she said, appearing in the doorway with her hands on her hips, attempting to look stern despite the smile tugging at her lips. What's the rule about sharing? Both girls looked up at her with identical expressions of manufactured innocence. Alex's green eyes in Grace's face, her own warm complexion in Emma's features. They were perfect mirrors of their parents' love, living proof that she and Alex had created something beautiful together. 15 minutes each, they recited in unison, the words coming out in that sing-song voice children used when repeating well-worn lessons. "And how long has Grace been playing?" Emma consulted the pink watch on her wrist with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice reviewing evidence. 23 minutes. "Grace Elizabeth Stroud," Natasha said, using her daughter's full name in the way that meant business. "What do we say?" Grace's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Sorry, Emma, your turn." She handed over the controller with the dramatic flair of someone surrendering their crown. "Thank you, baby girl." Natasha crossed the room to kiss the top of Grace's curly head. "Why don't you help me finish setting the table? Daddy will be home soon, and I want everything to be perfect. Perfect." The word had become her North Star. the goal she pursued with devoted determination. Perfect meals, perfect house, perfect children, perfect wife. She had built their life like a cathedral, every detail planned and polished until it gleamed. In the kitchen, Grace stood on her step stool, carefully placing the good china plates at each setting. Natasha had splurged on them for their 5th anniversary, Wedgwood with delicate blue flowers that reminded her of the first bouquet Alex had ever given her. She ran her fingers along the edge of one plate, remembering how proud she'd felt when Alex nodded his approval. "You really outdid yourself, Nat," he'd said that night, his voice warm with appreciation. "Everything looks incredible." The front door clicked open just as she finished arranging the cloth napkins. 6:32, exactly 2 minutes later than usual. Natasha felt a small flutter of something, not worry exactly, but a crack in the perfect rhythm of their routine. "Daddy!" Grace launched herself from the step stool and raced toward the foyer, Emma close behind. Natasha smoothed her hands over the cream-colored dress she'd chosen carefully that morning. Alex's favorite color, a cut that showed off the figure. She worked hard to maintain at the gym each morning while the girls were at school. She'd spent an hour on her hair and makeup, the same routine she'd perfected over the years. She wanted to be beautiful for him, always. But when Alex appeared, in the kitchen doorway, the twins clinging to his arms like small anchors, something in his expression made her stomach clench. His smile seemed forced, his eyes distant. He looked like a man playing a role he'd grown weary of performing. "Hey," he said, his voice flat. He gently disentangled himself from the girls. "Emma, Grace, go wash your hands for dinner." The twins scattered, their laughter echoing up the stairs. Alex loosened his tie, yanked it really, and moved to the kitchen island without offering his usual greeting kiss. The omission felt like a physical blow. "How was your day?" Natasha asked, her voice carefully bright. She moved toward him, expecting the usual ritual of welcome home touches, but he stepped away, creating distance between them. "We need to talk." 4 words, 4 simple words that shattered the crystal perfection of her world like a stone through a window. She'd heard that tone before, in movies and books and other people's tragedies, but never in her own kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of everything they'd built together. About what? The words came out smaller than she intended. Alex pulled out one of the bar stools and sat heavily, his hands clasped in front of him like he was preparing to deliver a verdict. "About us, about this marriage." The room tilted slightly, and Natasha gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. "What about our marriage?" "Nat." He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture she'd seen him make countless times when he was stressed about work, but never when he was talking about them. "This isn't working anymore." "What isn't working?" Her voice pitched higher, panic clawing its way up her throat. "I don't understand. Everything is fine. We're fine." "No, we're not." He looked up at her then, and the flatness in his green eyes, those eyes she'd fallen in love with, those eyes that had promised her forever, made her legs weak. "I'm not happy, Nat. I haven't been happy for a long time." The words hit her like physical blows. Not happy. How could he not be happy? She'd spent 8 years making sure he was happy, anticipating his needs, creating a home that welcomed him, raising his children, supporting his career. Everything she did was designed to make him happy. But she started, then stopped. What could she say? That she was happy, that their life was beautiful, that they had everything most people dreamed of. "I'm filing for divorce." The words hung in the air between them like poison gas. Natasha felt the room spin, felt her carefully constructed world crumble into dust and scatter on the wind. This couldn't be happening. This was their kitchen, their home, their life. This was Tuesday evening, and she'd made his favorite dinner. And the girls were upstairs washing their hands, and everything was supposed to be perfect. "Alex, please." Her voice broke on his name. "Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. We can go to counseling, There's nothing to fix." His voice was brutal in its certainty. "Nat, look at yourself, look at us. You've become boring, predictable. I feel like I'm suffocating." The criticism hit her like a slap. Boring, predictable. After everything she'd sacrificed, everything she'd given up to be the wife he wanted, this was her reward. "I gave up everything for you," she whispered. "My career, my dreams, everything. I made my life about making you happy. And that's the problem." He stood, straightening his suit jacket with the same motion he'd made every morning for 8 years. "You disappeared, Nat. The woman I married had passion, ambition. You became this domestic robot. I need more than that." Each word was a knife, precisely placed to cause maximum damage. She thought of the Parsons scholarship she'd turned down, the design portfolio gathering dust in their closet, the dreams she'd folded away like childhood clothes she'd outgrown. Is there someone else? The question scraped her throat raw. Alex paused, his hand on his tie, and for a moment something flickered across his face. Guilt, perhaps, or regret. There doesn't need to be someone else, Nat. You're just not enough. Anymore. Not enough. The words echoed in her chest, hollow and devastating. After 8 years of trying to be everything he wanted, she was simply not enough. Upstairs, the girls' laughter floated down like music from another world. A world where their father still loved their mother, where their family was still whole, where Tuesday evening dinners still meant something. Natasha gripped the counter harder, her knuckles white against her brown skin. "What about the girls?" "They'll be fine. Kids are resilient." He spoke about their daughters like they were a business consideration, a minor detail to be managed. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the arrangements." He moved toward the doorway, then paused, looking back at her with something that might have been pity. "I'm sorry, Nat, I really am, but I can't keep pretending this is the life I want." And then he was gone, leaving her alone in their perfect kitchen with the scent of white roses and the ruins of everything she'd believed in. Upstairs, the twins were calling for dinner, their voices bright with expectation. Natasha closed her eyes and tried to remember how to breathe. In the space of 10 minutes, she had become a woman she didn't recognize, a single mother, a divorced woman, a woman who was not enough. The crystal vase caught the evening light, casting rainbows across the marble counter. Beautiful and fragile, just like everything she'd thought was permanent in her life. Tomorrow, she would have to tell her daughters that their father was leaving. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out how to survive. But tonight, she had to pretend that dinner was still important, that their routines still mattered, that the world hadn't just ended in their perfect kitchen on a Tuesday evening in October. Chapter 2. The Cruelest Cuts. 6 months later, Natasha stood in the cramped bathroom of their new apartment, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The fluorescent light flickered, casting harsh shadows under eyes that had once been bright with hope. The apartment was a far cry from their Westchester home. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, barely enough space for a family rebuilding from scratch. It was what she could afford on the $800 Alex was court-ordered to pay in child support, money that arrived irregularly with lectures about fiscal responsibility. "Mommy, there's no hot water again," Grace called from the hallway, her voice small and disappointed. It had been 3 days since their last hot shower, and Natasha had been putting off calling the landlord because she knew what he'd say. "Fix it yourself or find somewhere else to live." "I know, baby. Use the wet wipes for now, okay? I'll figure it out." Wet wipes and cold water. This was what their life had become. Natasha pressed her palms against the cracked sink and tried to summon the energy for another day of survival. In 3 hours, she had to be at the office building downtown for her overnight cleaning job. Before that, She needed to drop the girls at her neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, pick up her other uniform for her weekend waitressing job, and somehow find time to hem the 3 dresses hanging on her bedroom door. Alterations work that brought in an extra $50 when she was lucky. The divorce had been brutal. Alex's connections ensured he received everything, while Natasha's court-appointed attorney seemed more interested in closing cases than fighting for her rights. Mrs. Stroud contributed nothing financially to the marriage, Alex's lawyer had argued. She has no recent work history, having been out of the workforce for 8 years by choice. The judge had nodded approvingly. Minimal alimony for 18 months, barely adequate child support, and custody that gave Alex every other weekend. Very reasonable, considering Mr. Stroud's demanding professional schedule, the judge had noted. The worst part was watching her. Daughters try to understand why their world had collapsed. Emma had started having nightmares. Grace had become unusually quiet. "When is Daddy coming to see us?" Grace asked yesterday, pressed against their apartment window. "This weekend, sweetheart," Natasha answered, though Alex had already cancelled. 2 visits this month for work emergencies. Each cancellation hurt the girls more. Her phone buzzed with Alex's text. "Can't take the girls this weekend. Big case coming up." She typed back, "They're looking forward to seeing you. This is the 3rd cancellation." His response, "Some of us have careers to worry about. Maybe if you'd focused on building one instead of playing house, you'd understand." Another text, "And tell them I can't do the dinner on Wednesday either. Client dinner ran long." Natasha wanted to throw the phone against the wall, to scream until her throat was raw, to drive to his downtown loft and force him to look at what his abandonment was doing to their daughters. Instead, she deleted his messages and put the phone away. She had learned that engaging with his cruelty only invited more of it. "Mommy." Emma appeared in the bathroom doorway, still in her pajamas. "I can't find my blue backpack, the one with the butterfly patch." "It's at Daddy's house, remember? You left it there last time." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. The blue backpack had been Emma's favorite, a gift Natasha had saved up to buy for her first day of 2nd grade. Now it was trapped in Alex's loft along with half their belongings, things he claimed were too inconvenient to return. Emma's face fell. "Can we call him and ask him to bring it?" "Not today, baby. We'll figure something else out." This was their new reality, a constant stream of small losses, tiny indignities that added up to a mountain of pain. The girls' toys. Divided between 2 homes, their sense of security shattered, their mother's promises growing emptier by the day because she simply didn't have the resources to keep them. Natasha helped Emma get ready for school, braiding her hair with steady hands despite the tremor of exhaustion running through her body. She'd been up until 2 a.m. working on alterations, squinting under the dim lamp because the overhead light in their bedroom had burned out and she couldn't afford to replace the bulb until next week. At breakfast, Grace pushed her cereal around the bowl without eating. "Brittany's mum is taking her to Disney World for spring break," she said quietly. "She asked if we were going anywhere fun." Natasha's heart clenched. Their spring break plans consisted of her picking up extra shifts at the restaurant while the girls stayed with Mrs. Rodriguez. "Maybe we can have our own adventure here," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "We could have movie marathons and build blanket forts." "Yeah!" Emma perked up, though Natasha could see the effort it took. "That could be fun, right, Grace?" Grace nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She was 7 years old and already learning to manage her disappointment, to pretend that less was enough. The knowledge broke something inside Natasha every single day. After dropping the girls at school, Natasha drove to her first job of the day, cleaning houses in the same neighborhood where she used to live. It was a special kind of torture, working in homes that mirrored her old life, seeing the casual abundance she'd once taken for granted. Designer handbags left carelessly on marble countertops, organic groceries filling massive refrigerators, family photos showing vacation smiles and holiday traditions. "Make sure you get the baseboards in the master bedroom," Mrs. Hartwell instructed, barely looking up from her yoga mat. "And be careful with the silk curtains. They're imported." Natasha nodded and smiled, swallowing her pride along with the urge to mention that she'd once owned similar curtains, that she knew the difference between silk and polyester, that she wasn't invisible just because she was holding a mop. The work was hard on her body. 8 years of suburban comfort hadn't prepared her for scrubbing floors and hauling vacuum cleaners up and down stairs. Her hands, once soft and manicured, were now rough and stained with cleaning chemicals. Her back ached constantly, and she developed a persistent cough from the harsh fumes. But the worst part came at the end of her shift, when she was loading her cleaning supplies into her car and heard a familiar laugh from the driveway next. A door. Alex's laugh, warm and carefree, in a way it hadn't been during the final months of their marriage. She looked up to see him walking toward a silver BMW, his arm around a woman Natasha didn't recognize. She was young, probably mid-20s, with long blonde hair and legs that went on forever. She wore the kind of casual designer outfit that cost more than Natasha made in a month. Alex was smiling at this woman the way he used to smile at Natasha, his whole face lit up with possibility and desire. He looked younger, happier, more alive than he had in years. "Alex!" Mrs. Hartwell called from her front porch. "Good to see you. How's the new place working out?" "Perfect," Alex called back, his arm tightening around the blonde woman's waist. Couldn't be happier. While his daughters ate cereal for dinner because Natasha couldn't afford groceries until Friday, while they lived in an apartment with broken plumbing and paper-thin walls, while they cried themselves to sleep missing their father. He couldn't be happier. Natasha ducked behind her car, praying he wouldn't see her. The humiliation of being caught in her cleaning uniform in this neighborhood where she no longer belonged would be more than she could bear. She waited until she heard the BMW drive away before she allowed herself to breathe again. That evening, after midnight shifts at the restaurant, Natasha sat at her tiny kitchen table with alterations that would pay for groceries. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but she couldn't stop. Every stitch meant survival. As she worked, she found herself sketching in the margins, quick designs that flowed without conscious thought. Dresses that spoke of strength, jackets that suggested armor, silhouettes that whispered of women who had survived. She'd been an artist once, before Alex, before she'd convinced herself that love meant disappearing into someone else's dreams. The designs felt rusty, but they were still there, waiting for her to remember who she used to be. For now, she was just a woman trying to survive one day at a time. Alex had called her not enough, but he was wrong. She was enough for her daughters, enough to survive this, enough to build something new from the wreckage. She just had to remember how. Chapter 3. The Spark Ignites. The discovery came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in the downtown Meridian Building's executive floor. Natasha was emptying trash when she found them, dozens of fashion magazines scattered. Across a conference table, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Elle. Her hands trembled as she picked up the top magazine. She hadn't looked at fashion magazines in over a year. They'd felt like painful reminders of abandoned dreams. But tonight was different. When she looked at the emerald gown on the cover, she didn't feel loss. She felt hunger, without meaning. And two, she pulled out her notebook and began to sketch. Quick lines that gradually grew bolder. A jacket with strong shoulders for a woman who needed armor. A dress that moved like liquid courage. "These aren't just clothes," she whispered. "They're survival gear." The designs poured out of her like water from a broken dam. Years of suppressed creativity channeled into visions of garments that understood struggle, that celebrated the kind of beauty that came from enduring rather than simply existing. She drew until her hand cramped and her eyes burned, until the cleaning cart full of magazines became a treasure trove of inspiration. When her shift ended at 6 a.m., Natasha drove home with a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt in months. She'd stolen 30 minutes from her work, time she probably didn't have, but those 30 minutes had reminded her of something crucial. She was still in there, the artist, the dreamer, the woman who had once believed she could create beauty from nothing. "Mommy, you look different," Grace observed over breakfast, studying Natasha's face with the intensity only children possessed. Different how? Less sad. The simple truth of it hit Natasha like a revelation. She had been sad, buried under sadness like snow, but for the first time in months she felt something else. Purpose, maybe, or hope. She wasn't sure what to call it, but it felt like sunlight. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Natasha spread the sketches across their tiny kitchen table and really looked at what she'd created. The designs were rough, unpolished, but they had something most fashion lacked: soul. These were clothes for women who worked 3 jobs and still found beauty in small moments. For mothers who sacrificed everything and still dreamed of more. For survivors who refused to be invisible. Over the following weeks, sketching became Natasha's secret addiction. She drew during her breaks at the restaurant, during slow moments at her cleaning jobs, late at night when the apartment was quiet. She sketched on napkins, receipt paper, the backs of envelopes, anywhere she could find space for the ideas that seemed to multiply faster than she could capture them. The breakthrough came 3 months later when Natasha was working in the Riverside Arts District. Loading her supplies, a young woman with purple hair approached. "Excuse me, but I think you dropped this." She held out one of Natasha's sketches, a wrap dress with architectural details. "Yes, that's mine. Sorry, it's nothing important." You kidding? This is incredible. I'm Zara Chen." She extended her hand enthusiastically. "I run a fashion blog, Zara's Threads, 50,000 followers. I've been searching for designers who understand that fashion should serve real women." That night, Natasha showed Zara her collection of sketches. With each design, Zara's excitement grew. "You understand something most designers don't, that strength and beauty aren't opposites." Zara picked up a blazer sketch. "What's your story?" Natasha found herself telling everything: the divorce, the struggle, the night sewing alterations. She expected pity, but Zara's eyes only brightened. "That's it. You're not designing from theory. You're designing from the trenches." Within a week, Zara featured the designs on her blog. From survival to style, the designer who understands real women. The response was immediate. Comments poured in from women who saw themselves in the designs. Messages arrived asking where to buy these clothes when they'd be available. "I need that blazer for my custody hearing, armor that looks like business attire. The wrap dress is exactly what I need for job interviews." The turning point came when Mrs. Patterson, an alteration customer, saw the blog and asked Natasha to create the wrap dress for her daughter's graduation. Maria's been through a tough divorce, starting over at 45. She needs something that makes her feel powerful. Natasha spent 2 weeks creating Maria's dress, pouring her hopes into every seam. When Maria tried it on, the transformation was stunning. "I feel like Wonder Woman," Maria said, "like I could command respect." That's exactly the point, Natasha realized. Maria wore it to graduation and sent a photo afterward, beaming with pride, surrounded by her children. 3 of Maria's friends asked for Zara's blog information. Within a month, Natasha had 5 custom orders. That night, Natasha wrote her first real goal. "By next Christmas, I want enough orders to quit at least 1 job." It seemed impossible, But looking around at what she'd already built from nothing, impossible might just be another word for inevitable. Chapter 4. Rising from the Ashes. 3 years after the divorce, Natasha stood before a narrow storefront in the Riverside Arts District, keys trembling in her hand. The For Lease sign had been removed that morning, replaced by a simple placard reading, "Phoenix Rising, opening soon." Her heart hammered against her ribs as she slid the key into the lock, the metallic click echoing through the empty space like a declaration of independence. The boutique was small, barely 800 square feet, but it was hers. Every square inch paid for, with saved cleaning wages, weekend alteration fees, and the growing income from her custom designs. She'd found the space 6 months ago, fallen in love with its exposed brick walls and large front windows that flooded the interior with natural light, and spent every day since working toward this moment. "Mama, it's perfect." Emma, now 10, rushed through the space with the enthusiasm only children possessed for new adventures. She pressed her face against the back window that overlooked a small courtyard where other artists and entrepreneurs had set up studios. Grace, more cautious like her mother, traced her fingers along the brick walls. "It feels like home," she said quietly, and Natasha felt tears prick her eyes. Home. They'd lived in 3 different apartments over the past 3 years, each slightly better than the last as Natasha's income grew, but none of them had felt permanent. This space, though, this felt like something they could build on. "Where will you put the dresses?" Grace asked, already envisioning the transformation. Natasha pulled out the carefully drafted floor plan she'd been refining for months. Dresses. On the right wall, blazers and jackets here in the center, accessories by the window. And back there, she pointed to the rear corner, a small fitting area where women can try things on and feel beautiful. The plan had been 3 years in the making. What started as sketches on magazine margins had evolved into a thriving custom design business with a waiting list stretching 2 months out. Zara's blog had led to features in local lifestyle magazines, which had attracted the attention of successful businesswomen who appreciated clothes designed for their real lives. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a prominent attorney, had become one of Natasha's most vocal advocates after wearing a Phoenix Rising blazer to close a major case. "I've never felt more confident in a courtroom," she'd told her colleagues, leading to a flood of orders from other professional women. Sarah Kim, a tech executive, wore Natasha's designs to board meetings and industry conferences. "These clothes understand that I need to look authoritative without sacrificing femininity," she'd written in her testimonial. Each satisfied customer became an ambassador, spreading word about the designer who created clothes for women who meant business, literally and figuratively. The financial journey to this moment had been a masterclass in sacrifice and strategic planning. Natasha had kept meticulous records of every penny earned and spent, watching her savings grow with the patience of someone who'd learned that security couldn't be taken for granted. She'd been able to quit her overnight cleaning job 8 months ago when her custom design income reached a sustainable level, though she still waitressed on weekends and took alteration work to build her business fund. Every dollar saved had gone toward this dream. First month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, basic renovation costs, initial inventory of fabrics and supplies, permits, insurance, and a small emergency fund. The renovation had been a labor of love, performed mostly by Natasha herself with help from other artists in the building. Miguel, who ran a pottery studio next door, had helped her install the track lighting. Carmen, a photographer from upstairs, had advised on the best angles for showcasing garments. The building's small community of creatives had embraced her vision, understanding that her success would contribute to the entire district's reputation. "I still can't believe you did it," Zara said, arriving with a box of champagne and a camera to document the moment. Over the past 3 years, Zara had become more than a blogger friend. She'd become Natasha's business partner, handling marketing and social media while Natasha focused on design and production. "I still can't believe it either," Natasha admitted, looking around at the space that would soon house her life's work. 3 years ago, I was scrubbing floors in office buildings. Now I'm about to open my own boutique." "Not just any boutique," Zara corrected, setting up her camera. "A boutique, with a waiting list of customers before it even opens. A boutique that's already profitable. A boutique that's going to change how women think about power dressing." The numbers still seemed surreal to Natasha. In the past year alone, she'd completed over 200 custom pieces, each one priced to reflect the quality of construction and uniqueness of design. Her average dress sold for $450, her blazers for $380, complete outfits for upward of $800. These weren't fast fashion prices, but her customers understood they were investing in pieces that would become workhorses in their wardrobes. More importantly, they were investing in the story. Every Phoenix Rising piece came with a small card that read, "Created by women who understand strength, worn by women who embody it." The boutique's opening was scheduled for the following Saturday, with a launch party that had generated buzz throughout the city's professional women's networks. The guest list included corporate executives, entrepreneurs, lawyers, doctors, and other women who appreciated the intersection of style and substance that Phoenix Rising represented. "I'm nervous," Natasha confessed to Zara as they began unpacking the first shipment of inventory. "What if no one comes? What if they come but don't buy anything? What if—" "Stop." Zara placed her hands on Natasha's shoulders, forcing her to make eye contact. "Look around. You have a 3-month waiting list for custom pieces. You have customers flying in from other cities to shop your collection. You have women literally begging you to take their money. The question isn't whether this will succeed, it's how quickly you'll need to expand." As if summoned by Zara's confidence, Natasha's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Walsh. "Saw the Phoenix Rising sign going up. Can I schedule a private shopping appointment before the official opening? I have a major conference next week and need armor." Armor. That's what Natasha's clothes had become for her customers. Protection that looked like fashion, strength that appeared as style. Women wore her designs to job interviews, divorce proceedings, board presentations, and first dates. They were clothes that whispered, "I belong here," in rooms where women sometimes felt they had to prove their worth. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Natasha and the girls worked side by side, creating displays that showcased each piece to its best advantage. The wrap dresses, still her bestseller, were arranged by color gradient, creating a rainbow of navy, burgundy, forest green, and charcoal. The blazers hung like sentries along the center wall, their clean lines and subtle details catching the light from the front windows. Emma, who had inherited her mother's eye for design, suggested grouping pieces by power level, complete outfits, for different occasions and confidence requirements. The boardroom warrior section featured sharp blazers paired with pencil skirts and statement jewelry. First date confidence showcased softer pieces that still projected strength. Courtroom. Commander displayed the most structured pieces in Natasha's collection. "You're going to be the most successful woman in the city," Grace declared on Friday evening as they put the finishing touches on the displays. "What makes you say that?" Natasha asked, adjusting the position of a necklace display. "Because you understand what women really need," Grace replied with the wisdom of a 13-year-old who'd watched her mother transform from victim to victor. "You understand what it feels like to need armor that looks like a dress." That night, Natasha lay awake in their apartment, their 4th since the divorce, but the first that felt truly temporary because she was already planning to move to something better and reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 3 years ago, Alex had told her she was not enough. Not successful enough, not interesting enough, not valuable enough to keep. She'd believed him then, had internalized his assessment of her worth, and spent months thinking he was right. But he'd been wrong about everything. She hadn't been not enough. She'd been suppressed, dimmed, convinced to make herself smaller, to fit into his vision of what a wife should be. The woman he'd dismissed had been hiding an entrepreneur, an artist, a businesswoman who understood markets he'd never even considered. Tomorrow, she would open the doors to Phoenix Rising and prove definitively that she wasn't just enough. She was more than Alex had ever imagined she could be. Her phone buzzed with one final message before sleep. "Can't wait for tomorrow. You're going to kill it. Zara." Followed immediately by another. "Break a leg tomorrow, Nat. We're all rooting for you. Miguel from next door." And then another. "So proud of you. Remember when you thought you'd never be anything more than a cleaning lady? Look at you now. Mrs. Rodriguez." Her former neighbor had become a loyal customer and fierce advocate. Natasha smiled in the darkness, surrounded by the love and support of people who'd watched her rebuild herself from nothing. Tomorrow would bring challenges, certainly, but tonight she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The girl who'd given up her dreams for marriage was gone. The woman who'd accepted not enough as truth had vanished. In their place stood Natasha Bigdan, designer and entrepreneur, creator of clothes that helped women feel as powerful as they truly were. Saturday morning, Phoenix Rising would open its doors, and the world would see what happened when a woman decided to become everything she'd been afraid to dream she could be. The Phoenix had risen indeed, and she was just getting started. Chapter 5. Fashion Week Triumph. 7 years after Alex had walked out of their perfect kitchen, Natasha stood backstage at New York Fashion Week, watching models prepare for the most crucial 20 minutes of her professional life. The Phoenix Rising Unbreakable collection hung on portable racks around her, 35 pieces that told the story of every woman who had ever been knocked down and chosen to rise again. 5 minutes to showtime, the production coordinator announced, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of hair touch-ups and last-minute adjustments. Natasha's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the opening. Look, a structured blazer in midnight blue with subtle armor-like quilting that caught the light like chainmail. The garment had taken her 3 months to perfect, each seam representing hours of experimentation with technique and proportion. "You look like you're going to throw up," Zara observed, appearing at her elbow with a bottle of water, and the calm confidence that had carried them both through 4 years of building this empire together. "I might," Natasha admitted. "Do you know how many people are out there? Anna Wintour is sitting front row. The buyer from Bergdorf's flew in specifically for this show. If this goes badly..." "It won't go badly," Zara interrupted firmly, "because this collection isn't just beautiful fashion, it's necessary fashion. You're showing clothes that understand real women's lives, and people are hungry for that authenticity." Through the years, Zara had evolved from blogger friend to creative director to business partner. She now oversaw Phoenix Rising's marketing, public relations, and expansion strategy, while Natasha focused on design and production. Together, they'd grown the brand from a single boutique to 5 locations across 3 cities, with online sales reaching customers nationwide. The journey to Fashion Week had been both strategic and serendipitous. Last year, when acclaimed fashion journalist Miranda Torres wore a Phoenix Rising suit to interview the Secretary of Commerce, the resulting photo had gone viral. "Power dressing for women who actually have power," Torres had captioned the Instagram post, generating hundreds of thousands of likes and thousands of new customers. The attention had led to features in Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Elle, not just as a designer profile, but as a cultural phenomenon. Natasha's story of rising from cleaning lady to fashion entrepreneur resonated with women worldwide, but more importantly, her clothes resonated with their needs. Places. The coordinator called out. The models took their positions, women of diverse ages and ethnicities, chosen specifically to represent the breadth of Phoenix Rising's customer base. There was Dr. Amanda Chen, the 45-year-old surgeon who'd become a brand advocate. Maya Rodriguez, the 28-year-old startup founder. Janet Williams, the 52-year-old corporate executive who'd been wearing Phoenix Rising since the boutique's second year. But the opening model was someone special. Emma, now 17 and poised beyond her years. She would walk out in that midnight. Blue blazer paired with a pencil skirt that moved like liquid confidence, embodying the next generation of women who understood that strength and style weren't mutually exclusive. "Mom," Emma appeared beside her, radiant in the opening look. "I know Dad's probably watching this. What do you want me to think about when I walk?" Natasha felt her heart clench and expand simultaneously. Alex had indeed probably seen the Fashion Week coverage. It was impossible to miss. Every major fashion publication had featured Phoenix Rising's debut, and Natasha's rags to riches story had been covered in business magazines and morning shows. "Think about how far we've come," Natasha said, adjusting Emma's collar with the muscle memory of a mother who'd dressed her daughter for countless first days and special occasions. "Think about how proud I am of you. Think about how proud you should be of yourself." 1 minute. The music started. A custom composition that began with a single piano note and built to a crescendo of strings and percussion. Natasha had worked with a composer to create something that matched the collection's emotional arc, starting vulnerable but growing powerful, complex but never overwrought. Emma took her position at the curtain, and for a moment, Natasha saw not her accomplished teenage daughter, but the 7-year-old who'd asked why Daddy didn't love them anymore. The same girl who'd watched her mother work 3 jobs and still found ways to be proud of their small apartment and thrift store treasures. "She's going to be incredible," Zara whispered. The curtain lifted and Emma stepped into the lights. The effect was electric. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd grown up watching her mother transform from victim to victor, wearing clothes that had been designed to celebrate exactly that kind of strength. The blazer caught the runway. Lights like armor, and Emma's posture communicated everything the Phoenix Rising brand stood for: power, resilience, and unapologetic femininity. The audience's response was immediate. Not just polite Fashion Week applause, but genuine appreciation for what they were seeing. This wasn't fashion as fantasy. This was fashion as empowerment. Model after model walked out, each look building on the last, to tell a complete story. The courtroom confidence section featured sharp suiting in rich jewel tones. Boardroom grace showcased softer pieces that still commanded respect. Warrior elegance displayed the collection's evening wear, gowns that suggested medieval armor while maintaining absolute sophistication. Each piece served a purpose in the narrative Natasha had crafted over 7 years of understanding her customers' needs. These weren't clothes to be admired from afar. They were tools for women navigating professional and personal challenges with style and strength. Halfway through the show, Natasha spotted Dr. Jennifer Walsh in the audience, the attorney who'd been one of her first professional customers. Dr. Walsh was sitting next to Miranda Torres, both women nodding appreciatively at looks they clearly understood on a visceral level. The finale approached with a series of statement pieces that represented the collection's peak. A coat that moved like liquid confidence, a dress that whispered power in every seam, a blazer that commanded attention without demanding it. And then it was over. The final model, Dr. Chen in a stunning navy gown that managed to be both professional and elegant, completed her walk and took her position. "Natasha! Natasha! Natasha!" the backstage team chanted, pushing her toward the runway entrance. This was the moment every designer dreamed of and feared in equal measure, the walk that would define how the collection was received, the 30 seconds that could make or break everything she'd built. Natasha stepped into the lights, wearing one of her own designs, a blazer and skirt combination in deep emerald that she'd created specifically for this moment. It was armor disguised as elegance, strength presented as sophistication. The runway stretched ahead of her like a bridge between her past and future. At the end waited the fashion industry's most influential people, their judgment about to determine whether Phoenix Rising would join the ranks of major fashion houses or remain a regional boutique brand. But as she walked, Natasha realized she wasn't nervous anymore. She'd already won the only victory that truly mattered. She'd built something meaningful from nothing, created a brand that made women feel powerful, proved that she was capable of more than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined. The applause when she reached the end of the runway was thunderous. The entire audience was on its feet, not just polite appreciation, but genuine enthusiasm for what they'd witnessed. This wasn't just a fashion show. It was a statement about what fashion could be when it understood its purpose. In the front row, Anna Wintour was smiling, actually smiling, while taking notes. The Bergdorf's buyer was already on her phone, presumably calling her team. Fashion. Bloggers were typing furiously on their phones, and photographers were capturing every moment. But the sight that made Natasha's heart soar was simpler. Grace in the audience, tears streaming down her face, holding up a sign that read, "That's my mom!" As the models joined her for the final bow, Natasha felt the weight of everything she'd accomplished. 7 years ago, Alex had left her because she wasn't enough. Tonight, she stood at the pinnacle of an industry that celebrated excellence, having built a brand that spoke to millions of women worldwide. The standing ovation continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When it finally died down, reporters pushed forward with questions, buyers approached with orders, and influencers requested meetings. "Ms. Big Dan," a reporter called out, "this collection is being called a game changer for professional women's fashion." What inspired Unbreakable? Natasha thought for a moment, then smiled. Every woman who's ever been told she wasn't enough and decided to prove them wrong. This collection is for women who understand that style and strength aren't opposites. They're partners. Later that evening, at the after-party in a rooftop venue overlooking Manhattan, Natasha stood with her daughters and Zara, watching the city lights twinkle below them. Orders were already pouring in, not just from individual customers, but from major retailers who wanted to carry Phoenix Rising nationally. "The buyer from Nordstrom wants to place an order for 50 stores, Zara reported, scrolling through the messages flooding her phone. Bergdorf's wants an exclusive line, and 3 different investors want to meet about expansion funding. "What are you thinking?" Emma asked, studying her mother's face. Natasha considered the question seriously. 7 years ago, she'd been cleaning. These same buildings, invisible to the people now celebrating her success. The transformation still sometimes felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. "I'm thinking," she said finally, "that we're just getting started." Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw the show coverage. Impressive. AS. Alex." After 7 years of minimal contact beyond child support payments, he'd chosen tonight to reach out. Natasha stared at the message for a moment, then deleted it without responding. His opinion, positive or negative, was irrelevant now. She'd built an empire without his support, achieved success beyond his imagination, become a woman he'd never believed she could be. The girl he'd dismissed as not enough had just conquered Fashion Week. And tomorrow, she would wake up and conquer something else. Chapter 6, Empire Built on Strength. 12 years after Alex Stroud had told her she wasn't enough, Natasha Bigdan stood in her corner office on the 32nd floor of a Manhattan high-rise, gazing down at the city she had conquered. Phoenix Rising headquarters hummed with activity. Designers sketching, pattern makers perfecting silhouettes, marketing teams planning global campaigns. The view encompassed the building where she'd once cleaned offices at 3 a.m., invisible to executives who now sought her meetings. She'd chosen this location for its symbolism. Every morning she could see her past and her expanding future. "Natasha, the Forbes photographer is here for your cover shoot," Marcus announced. "And the Financial Times wants to confirm your interview for the Women Who Built Empires series," Forbes cover. Even her second time, the phrase sent a thrill through her chest. The first had been the previous year at the $50 million revenue mark. This time, the story would focus on international expansion, London, Paris, and Tokyo openings within 18 months. "Tell them I'll be right down," she replied, taking a moment to appreciate the reflection staring back at her from the window's glass. The woman, looking back, bore little resemblance to the broken divorcee who'd once scrubbed these very floors. This woman wore a Phoenix Rising blazer in deep burgundy, a piece from her latest collection that had sold out within hours of its online debut. Her hair was styled in a sleek bob that spoke of confidence and purpose. Her posture radiated the kind of power that came from building something meaningful from nothing. At 45, Natasha had become exactly what she'd never imagined: a fashion industry icon and symbol of female resilience. Phoenix Rising had grown from a single boutique to a global brand with 73 stores, reaching 6 continents. The brand's influence extended beyond fashion. The Phoenix Rising Foundation had provided microloans to over 3,000 women. Starting companies, the annual conference had become essential for female entrepreneurs. Every woman deserves the chance to rise from whatever ashes life has handed her, Natasha had said in her TED Talk, viewed over 12 million times. Her daughters had become integral to the empire. Emma, studying business at Columbia, was officially Director of Strategic Development. Grace, taking a gap year to focus on photography, had shot covers for 3 major magazines while documenting Phoenix Rising's expansion. "My mom taught me that strength isn't about never falling down," Grace had written in a recent post that went viral. "It's about getting back up and helping other women do the same." The afternoon photo shoot was for Forbes' Most Powerful Women in Business issue. During a break, the journalist asked about inspiration for this season's collection. "Evolution," Natasha replied. "Every collection is about women evolving, growing stronger, becoming more confident, refusing to be limited by expectations. This season focuses on the idea that power comes in many forms. Sometimes it's a sharp blazer for a presentation. Sometimes it's a dress that makes you feel beautiful enough to start dating again. Sometimes it's a coat that helps you feel protected. Your success story has become legendary," the journalist continued, "from cleaning lady to fashion mogul. What would you say to women who feel trapped?" "I'd say that the person who told you that you weren't enough was wrong," she replied. "Maybe it was an ex-husband, maybe a boss, maybe a voice in your head, but they were wrong. You have capabilities you haven't discovered yet. The question isn't whether you're enough, it's whether you're ready to find out how much you really are." After the shoot, Emma waited with quarterly reports. Online sales up 43%, international pre-sales exceeding projections by 60%, and 3 Fortune 100 companies want custom executive wardrobes. Emma's expression shifted. The Wall Street Journal wants to do a feature on Phoenix Rising's impact on women's professional advancement. They're calling it the confidence factor. Corporations report increased leadership participation from women wearing our brands, meaning women who wear Phoenix Rising are more likely to speak up in meetings, apply for promotions, take leadership roles. The clothes are literally changing behavior. As evening fell, Natasha prepared to leave for her penthouse, a space with floor-to-ceiling windows where the girls had their own studios. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to prove that success could be built on authenticity and purpose. Standing by her window, she saw not just a successful businesswoman, but a woman who had transformed pain into purpose, struggle into strength, rejection into revolution. Alex had been wrong about everything. She hadn't just been enough. She'd been extraordinary, waiting for the right moment to prove it to herself and the world. Chapter 7. The Wedding Invitation. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, elegant and deceptively innocent among the stack of business correspondence that Marcus had arranged on Natasha's desk. Cream-colored cardstock with delicate gold lettering, the kind of expensive stationery that whispered old money and careful planning. Natasha almost missed it entirely. Her attention focused on quarterly reports from their European expansion and design sketches for next season's collection. But something about the familiar handwriting on the envelope made her pause. Her fingers traced the graceful script that spelled out her name, recognition dawning slowly like sunrise through fog. Rebecca Chen. Natasha hadn't seen her college roommate in person for years, though they'd maintained the kind of distant friendship that social media enabled. Liking each other's posts, exchanging brief birthday messages, following each other's lives from afar. Rebecca had moved back to the East Coast 2 years ago for a marketing position and had been slowly reconnecting with old friends from their NYU days. Their last real conversation had been when Rebecca had called to congratulate her on the Forbes cover, genuine warmth in her voice as she marveled at how far they'd both come since college. Natasha opened the envelope with the careful precision she applied to everything in her life now, sliding out the heavy cardstock that announced Rebecca's engagement with understated elegance. Rebecca Ann Chen and Alexander S. request the honor of your presence at their wedding, Alexander S. Natasha felt a small flutter of something, not concern exactly, but curiosity. It was a common enough name, certainly. She'd probably met a dozen Alexanders in her business dealings over the past few years. Still, something about the formality of the invitation, the way it reduced the groom to initials, struck her as odd. She flipped the invitation over, looking for more details. The wedding was set for the 3rd Saturday of November at the Rosewood Country Club in Westchester, an exclusive venue she recognized from charity events and corporate functions. The same kind of place where she and Alex used to attend firm parties during their marriage, back when she'd been content to smile and make small talk while he networked. A small card had been tucked behind the main invitation, Rebecca's personal note written in her familiar, enthusiastic style. Natasha, I can't believe I'm finally getting married. I know it's been forever since we've talked properly, but you've been such an inspiration to me over the years. Watching you build Phoenix Rising has been incredible. I'd love for you to be there to celebrate with me. I'm marrying the most wonderful man, and I can't wait for you to meet him. He's a lawyer. I know, but he's one of the good ones. And he makes me laugh every single day. Please say you'll come. Love, Rebecca. P.S. Would it be crazy to ask if you might consider designing something for me? I've dreamed of wearing Phoenix Rising to my own wedding. Natasha smiled despite herself. Rebecca's enthusiasm was infectious, even through a handwritten note. She could picture her former roommate practically bouncing as she wrote the invitation. The same energy she'd brought to everything from late-night study sessions to weekend adventures in the city, and the request to design her wedding dress was touching. Over the years, Natasha had created custom pieces for several high-profile weddings, but each one still felt special. The honor of being trusted with someone's most important day, the responsibility of creating something that would live forever in photographs and memories. Marcus? she called through her office door. "Can you check my schedule for November 3rd, Rebecca Chen's wedding?" "November 3rd is completely clear," he replied, appearing in her doorway with his ever-present tablet. "Should I RSVP?" "Yes." Natasha considered the question. The autumn season was always busy with the holiday collection launches and year-end planning. But Rebecca had been important to her once. They'd shared dreams and fears during those college years, had stayed up countless nights talking about the futures they hoped to build. Rebecca deserved to have her there for this milestone. "Yes, please send a response and see if we can arrange a consultation about a custom piece for the bride. Rebecca Chen, she's an old friend from college." "Of course. And should I arrange for a +1? The question caught Natasha off guard. She'd been single for the past 10 years, not by accident, but by choice. There had been men, certainly, successful executives and entrepreneurs who appreciated her intelligence and ambition, artists who understood her creative vision, even a few celebrities who'd been drawn to her story of transformation. But none of them had inspired her to risk the independence she'd fought so hard to achieve. "No +1 needed," she said. "I'll take Emma and Grace if they're available. Rebecca would love to see how they've grown up." Over the following weeks, Natasha found herself looking forward to the wedding with an anticipation that surprised her. Between board meetings and design sessions, she began sketching ideas for Rebecca's dress, something that would complement her friend's petite frame and bubbly personality, while maintaining the sophistication that a Rosewood Country Club wedding demanded. When Rebecca came in for her consultation 6 weeks before the wedding, the years melted away instantly. She was still the same warm, effervescent woman who'd been Natasha's closest confidant during college, though success had given her a polish and confidence that suited her perfectly. "I still can't believe this is your office," Rebecca marveled, looking around at the design studio with its floor-to-ceiling windows and carefully curated displays of Phoenix Rising pieces. "Remember when we used to sketch fashion ideas on napkins at that terrible coffee shop near campus? The Grind," Natasha laughed, "where the coffee tasted like dishwater and the Wi-Fi never worked. And you used to say you'd design clothes for real women someday, not just runway models?" Rebecca's eyes grew misty. "Look at you now. You've changed the entire industry." As they worked through design options, Rebecca's excitement about her upcoming marriage was infectious. She spoke about Alexander with the kind of dreamy affection that belonged to someone truly in love for the first time. "He's never been married before," Rebecca confided as Natasha took her measurements. "He told me he was waiting for the right person and that he never believed in marriage until he met me." Isn't that romantic? Something about the phrasing tugged at Natasha's memory, though she couldn't quite place why. She'd heard similar sentiments from countless clients over the years. Everyone wanted to believe their love story was unique. "Tell me about him," Natasha said, more out of friendship than curiosity. "What's he like?" "Oh, he's wonderful. Successful, charming, makes me feel like the most beautiful woman in the world." Rebecca's smile was radiant. "He's a corporate lawyer, partner at Hartwell, Morrison and Associates, Alexander Stroud." The measuring tape slipped from Natasha's fingers. Alexander Stroud. The name hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and making the studio spin around her. She gripped the edge of her design table, fighting to keep her expression neutral while her world tilted on its axis. Alex. Her Alex. The man who'd told her she wasn't enough, who'd walked out of their perfect kitchen 10 years ago, who'd dismissed their 8-year marriage and their daughters as inconvenient obstacles to his happiness. "Natasha, are you okay?" Rebecca's voice sounded far away, concerned. "I'm fine," Natasha managed, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. I thought I recognized the name. Hartwell, Morrison is a big firm." "Oh, do you know someone there?" "Alex says it's a small world in corporate law," Alex says. The casual familiarity of it made Natasha's stomach clench. Of course, Rebecca called him Alex, the same name Natasha had whispered in love and screamed in anger, the name that had once meant safety and partnership and shared dreams. I might have met him at some industry event, Natasha lied smoothly, her years of business training kicking in to mask her emotional turmoil. You know how these corporate functions are? Everyone knows everyone. But even as she spoke, her mind was racing. Alex was marrying Rebecca, sweet, trusting Rebecca, who believed she was his first real love, who thought she was special because he'd never believed in marriage before. Rebecca, who had no idea that the man she was planning to spend her life with had already spent 8 years married to someone else, had already abandoned a wife and children when they became inconvenient. He's so different from the men I usually date, Rebecca continued, oblivious to Natasha's internal earthquake. Usually I go for the artsy types, you know, but Alex is so stable, so sure of himself. He makes me feel safe. Safe. The word was a knife in Natasha's chest. She had once felt safe with Alex too, had built her entire identity around being his wife, had trusted him with her dreams and her future. And he had destroyed all of it with the casual cruelty of someone discarding a toy he'd grown tired of, playing with. Somehow, Natasha managed to complete the consultation, taking measurements and discussing design details while her heart hammered against her ribs. She smiled and nodded and made appropriate responses while internally screaming at the unfairness of it all. Rebecca was everything Alex claimed to want. Young, successful but not threatening, beautiful in a conventional way, clearly worshipful of his achievements. She was also trusting and genuine, exactly the kind of woman who would believe his lies about never having been married, who would accept his reinvented history without question. "I can't wait for you to meet him at the wedding," Rebecca said, as they wrapped up the session. "He's going to be so impressed when I tell him you're designing my dress." Everyone knows who Natasha Bigdan is these days. Natasha Bigdan, not Natasha Stroud. She'd legally changed her name back after the divorce, reclaiming her identity along with her independence. To Rebecca, she was simply a successful designer and old friend. There was no reason for Rebecca to connect her to Alexander Stroud's past, no reason to suspect that the woman creating her wedding dress had once been married to her fiancé. After Rebecca left, Natasha sat alone in her studio, staring at the sketches they'd created together. The dress would be beautiful, elegantly simple with subtle details that would complement Rebecca's personality perfectly. She would create something stunning for her friend's wedding, would smile and celebrate and pretend that her heart wasn't breaking all over again. Because that's what she did now. She survived, she endured, she protected others from the truth when the truth would only cause pain. But as she looked at those sketches, Natasha made herself a promise. She would go to that wedding. She would see Alex pledge his love to another woman while pretending his first marriage had never existed. She would watch him promise Rebecca forever, while knowing exactly how meaningless his promises were. And if the opportunity arose, if Rebecca discovered the truth about the man she was marrying, Natasha would be there to help her friend understand that she deserved so much better than a man who could erase an entire family from his history. The wedding was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to prepare for seeing Alex again. 6 weeks to decide what she owed to Rebecca's happiness versus what she owed to the truth. 6 weeks to prepare for the confrontation she'd never expected to have, but now realized had been inevitable. From the moment he'd walked out of their kitchen 10 years ago, Alex Stroud thought he could rewrite history, could start fresh with a woman who knew nothing about his capacity for cruelty and abandonment. He was about to learn how wrong he could be. Chapter 8. The Shocking Discovery. The Rosewood Country Club looked like something from a fairy tale. its manicured grounds transformed into an autumn wonderland of golden leaves and elegant white florals. Natasha sat in her Tesla in the circular drive, watching guests in designer attire stream toward the entrance, their laughter and excitement floating on the crisp November air. She had chosen her outfit with the precision of a general preparing for battle, a stunning creation from her latest collection in deep emerald silk that moved like liquid confidence. The dress had graced the cover of Harper's Bazaar the previous month, and wearing it felt like armor disguised as elegance. Her jewelry was minimal but striking, diamond earrings that caught the afternoon light, and a vintage watch that had belonged to her grandmother, a reminder of the strength that ran in her bloodline. "Mom, you look incredible," Emma said from the passenger seat, reaching over to squeeze her mother's hand. At 20, Emma had inherited Natasha's poise and Alex's green eyes, though thankfully none of his capacity for cruelty. She wore a phoenix rising blazer in navy blue over a silk camisole, looking every inch the accomplished business student she had become. Grace, now 18 and radiant in a dress she had designed herself under Natasha's guidance, leaned forward from the back seat. "Are you sure you're okay? You've been quiet since we left the city." Natasha met her younger daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror, seeing her own determined spirit reflected there. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just processing seeing someone from my past." They hadn't told the girls the truth about who was getting married today. Emma and Grace knew she'd been married before their father, knew Alex had left when they were young, but the details had always been kept age-appropriate and minimal. They remembered Alex only vaguely, a distant figure who'd occasionally appeared for awkward custody visits before disappearing from their lives entirely when his career demands made regular visits impractical, as his lawyer had phrased it. As far as Emma and Grace knew, this was simply a college friend's wedding, an opportunity to celebrate love and catch up with old friends. Natasha intended to keep it that way. Regardless of what happened today, they walked toward the entrance together, Natasha's heels clicking against the flagstone path with the confidence that 10 years of building an empire had given her. Other guests turned to look, not with the idle curiosity of wedding attendees sizing each other up, but with the recognition that came when someone truly important entered a room. "Is that Natasha Bigdan?" she heard a woman whisper to her companion. "The fashion designer? Oh my God, it is. She's even more beautiful in person. I heard she's friends with the bride. Rebecca must be so excited to have her here." The attention felt surreal, but manageable. Natasha had learned to navigate public recognition with grace, to smile and nod while maintaining the kind of elegant distance that discouraged unwanted conversation. Today, though, she was grateful for the buffer it provided. People were less likely to ask probing questions when they were starstruck. Inside the country club, the ceremony space had been transformed into something magical. White chairs arranged in perfect rows faced an altar decorated with cascading florals in cream and gold. The afternoon light streamed through tall windows, casting everything in a warm, romantic glow that should have been beautiful. Instead, Natasha, it felt like she was walking through a nightmare wrapped in wedding finery. "Natasha!" Rebecca's voice rang out across the space, bright with genuine joy. She glided over in the dress Natasha had created for her, a masterpiece of silk and lace that turned Rebecca into a vision of bridal perfection. The irony of designing a wedding dress for her ex-husband's bride wasn't lost on Natasha, but she'd poured her professional pride into the piece nonetheless. "Rebecca, you look absolutely stunning," Natasha said, and meant it. The dress was everything a bride should be: romantic without being fussy, elegant without being cold, memorable without being ostentatious. "I feel like a princess," Rebecca beamed, spinning slightly to show off the dress's movement. "Everyone keeps asking who designed it, and I keep telling them I have the most talented friend in the world." Emma and Grace hung back slightly, giving the women space to reconnect. But Natasha could see them taking in every detail of the wedding preparations with the keen eye of young women who'd grown up in the fashion industry. "These must be your daughters," Rebecca said, turning to include them in the conversation. "I remember seeing their photos in that Vogue profile. They're even more beautiful in person." "Thank you," Emma replied with the practiced politeness that came from years of accompanying her mother to industry events. "Congratulations on your wedding. The venue is incredible." "It really is," Grace added, though Natasha noticed her younger daughter's artist's eye was cataloguing details. The flower arrangements, the lighting, the way the space flowed from ceremony to reception area. "I have to go finish getting ready," Rebecca said, checking the delicate watch on her wrist. "But I wanted to make sure you had good seats. You're at table 4, right up front with some of Alex's colleagues from the firm. They're going to be so impressed to meet you." Alex's colleagues. The irony was almost unbearable. Natasha nodded and smiled, while internally preparing herself for the possibility of running into people who might remember her from firm events during her marriage. 10 years was a long time, and her transformation had been so complete that recognition was unlikely, but the possibility still made her stomach clench. As Rebecca hurried away to handle last-minute preparations, Natasha guided her daughters toward their assigned seats. Table 4 was indeed close to the front, positioned to give an excellent view of the ceremony. The other guests at their table were already arriving, well-dressed professionals who looked like exactly the kind of people Alex would want to impress. "Dr. Patricia Mills," said an elegant woman in her 50s, extending her hand as they settled into their seats. "I'm with the hospital board, where Alex's firm handles our legal matters. Are you friends of Rebecca's?" "College roommates," Natasha replied smoothly. "I'm Natasha Bigdan, and these are my daughters, Emma and Grace." Dr. Mills's eyes widened with recognition. "The fashion designer? I have 3 of your blazers. They're absolutely transformative. I feel like I can take on the world when I wear them." "That's exactly the intention," Natasha smiled, falling into the familiar rhythm of discussing her work. It was a safe topic, one that allowed her to focus on something other than the growing anxiety in her chest. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more guests at their table. A corporate attorney named James Harrison and his wife Linda, both of whom seemed impressed to be dining with someone of Natasha's stature. As they made small talk about fashion and business, Natasha found herself half listening to conversations from neighboring tables. That's when she heard it. "Alex is so lucky to have found Rebecca," a woman was saying to her table mate. "After what happened with his first wife, I didn't think he'd ever trust marriage again." Natasha's attention sharpened, though she kept her expression neutral as she strained to hear more. "What happened with his first wife?" the table mate asked. "Oh, it was terrible. She was completely unstable, had some kind of mental breakdown. After their son was born, Alex tried to help her, but she became increasingly erratic and paranoid. Eventually, she started making wild accusations about his fidelity, became completely obsessed with the idea that he was cheating." Natasha's blood turned to ice. "Son? What son? How awful for him," the second woman replied sympathetically. "No wonder he's been so cautious about relationships since then." "Exactly. And then she just disappeared one day, took the child and vanished. Alex hired private investigators, spent years trying to find them, but she'd covered her tracks completely. He finally had to accept that they were gone and try to move on with his life." The world tilted around Natasha. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself, fighting to keep her breathing even as rage and disbelief warred in her chest. Alex hadn't just erased their marriage from his history, he'd completely rewritten it, casting himself as the victim of an unstable wife who'd stolen their child and disappeared. Except there was no son. There had never been a son. There were 2 daughters, Emma and Grace, sitting right here at this wedding, unrecognized and unknown to the guests who were discussing their father's fictional tragedy. And she hadn't disappeared with them. Alex had simply chosen to minimize his involvement in their lives until it became non-existent. "Mom?" Emma's voice was quiet, concerned. "You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" Natasha forced herself to smile, to project calm, despite the hurricane of emotions tearing through her. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little warm in here." But she wasn't fine. She was barely holding herself together as the full scope of Alex's deception became clear. He hadn't just told Rebecca he'd never been married. He'd created an entire mythology around a failed first marriage to explain away any questions about his past. A marriage to an unstable woman who'd stolen his child and disappeared, leaving him too traumatized to commit again until he met the right woman. It was brilliant, really. The story cast him as both victim and hero, explaining any gaps in his romantic history while generating sympathy and admiration from new friends and colleagues. No one would question why he'd been single for so long when they believed he'd spent years searching for his lost child. More importantly, it completely erased Emma and Grace from his narrative. They weren't his abandoned daughters. They were props in a story that didn't acknowledge their existence at all. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The ceremony is about to begin. The wedding coordinator's announcement cut through Natasha's spiraling thoughts, forcing her to focus on the present moment. Around them, guests settled into their chairs with the excited murmur that preceded every wedding ceremony. Rebecca would be walking down the aisle soon, radiant in the dress Natasha had created, ready to pledge her life to a man who'd built their entire relationship on lies. The music began, classical guitar playing something soft and romantic. And the wedding party started their processional, groomsmen in perfectly tailored tuxedos, bridesmaids in flowing gowns that complemented Rebecca's chosen color palette. Each member of the wedding party looked like they'd stepped from the pages of a bridal magazine. And then Alex appeared at the altar. 10 years had changed him, softened him around the edges in the way that prosperity and comfort often did to men in their 40s. His hair was more silver than brown now, and he'd gained perhaps 20 pounds, but he still carried himself with the confidence that had first attracted her in college. He wore his tuxedo like armor, projecting success and stability to the crowd of people who believed they knew his story. When his eyes swept the crowd, they passed over Natasha without recognition. Why would they linger? As far as Alex was concerned, his ex-wife was probably still struggling somewhere, still cleaning buildings or serving coffee, still trapped in the mediocrity he'd always believed was her natural state. He had no idea that the woman sitting in the fourth row was worth more than most of his law firm's partners combined, that she'd built an empire from the ashes of their marriage, that she'd become everything he'd never believed she could be. He had no idea that his daughters were sitting 20 feet away, beautiful and accomplished and completely unrecognized by the man who'd helped create them. He had no idea that his carefully constructed web of lies was about to unravel in the most public way possible. The bride's processional began, and Rebecca appeared at the end of the aisle like a vision in white. Silk and lace, she was radiant, glowing with happiness and love, completely trusting in the man waiting for her at the altar. Natasha watched Alex's face as Rebecca walked toward him, saw the genuine emotion there, the joy and anticipation that suggested he might actually love this woman in his own limited way. It was the same expression he'd worn when Natasha had walked down a similar aisle 15 years ago, the same promise of forever that had turned out to be heartbreakingly temporary. As Rebecca reached the altar and took Alex's hands, Natasha made a decision that would change everything. She was going to let him speak his vows, let him promise Rebecca forever while surrounded by people who believed his lies about his past. She was going to let him think he'd gotten away with erasing their marriage and their daughters from history. And then, when the moment was right, she was going to remind him, and everyone present, exactly who Natasha Stroud had become and exactly what kind of man Alexander Stroud really was. The ceremony was about to begin, but for Natasha, the real reckoning was just starting. Chapter 9. The Moment of Reckoning. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Rebecca Ann Chen and Alexander James Stroud in holy matrimony. The officiant's voice carried across the assembled guests with practiced warmth, but Natasha barely heard the words. Her attention was fixed on Alex, standing at the altar in his perfectly pressed tuxedo, holding Rebecca's hands like they were precious artifacts. The man who had once promised her forever was about to make the same promise to another woman, built on a foundation of lies that erased 8 years of marriage and 2 beautiful daughters. Marriage is a sacred bond, the officiant continued, a commitment that should not be entered into lightly, but reverently, thoughtfully, and with complete honesty about one's past and intentions. Complete honesty. The irony made Natasha's hands clench in her lap. Rebecca possessed no honesty at all, not about Alex's true history, not about his capacity for cruelty, not about his ability to simply erase inconvenient truths when they no longer served his narrative. Emma shifted beside her, subtly checking her phone. Grace was sketching in a small notebook, probably capturing details of the floral arrangements for her photography portfolio. Both girls were completely unaware that they were watching their father, a man they barely remembered, pledge his love to a woman who believed she was the first person he'd ever wanted to marry. The couple has chosen to write their own vows, the officiant announced, stepping back to give them center stage. Rebecca went first, her voice clear and joyful as she spoke about finding her soulmate, about how Alex had taught her what real love felt like, about how grateful she was to have found someone who'd never given his heart away before meeting her. "You told me you were waiting your whole life for the right person," Rebecca said, tears glistening in her eyes, "and I feel so blessed to be that person for you." Natasha's jaw clenched so hard she thought her teeth might crack. Behind her, she could hear other guests murmuring appreciatively about the romantic sentiment, about how sweet it was that Alex had saved himself for true love. Then it was Alex's turn. "Rebecca," he began, his voice carrying the same smooth confidence that had once made Natasha believe every word he said. "When I met you, I thought I knew what love was. But you showed me that everything I'd experienced before was just a pale imitation of the real thing." Lies. Every word was a calculated lie designed to support his fictional narrative. "I've never believed in marriage before," Alex continued, looking directly into Rebecca's eyes with apparent sincerity. "I've seen too many people rush into commitment without understanding what it really means. But with you, I finally understand why people say, 'When you know, you know.'" The assembled guests sighed collectively at the romantic declaration. Natasha felt sick. "You are my first real love, my last love, my only love," Alex said, lifting Rebecca's hands to his lips. "I promise to spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice in trusting me with your heart. First love. Only love." The man who had once held Natasha while she cried during fertility treatments was standing 20 feet away, claiming he'd never loved anyone before the woman wearing the wedding dress Natasha had designed. "If anyone has a reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace." The traditional words rang out across the ceremony space, and Natasha felt time slow to a crawl. This was the moment, the invitation to speak, to reveal the truth, to shatter the beautiful facade that Alex had constructed around his reinvented life. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Natasha could feel her heart hammering against her ribs, could sense Emma and Grace beside her, could almost taste the explosive confrontation hovering on the edge of this perfect moment. She stood up. The movement was fluid, graceful, the kind of confident rise that came naturally to someone who'd spent years commanding boardrooms and runway shows. Every head in the venue turned toward her. 200 pairs of eyes suddenly focused on the striking woman in emerald silk who'd just interrupted the ceremony. "I object." Her voice carried clearly across the space, calm and controlled, despite the inferno of emotions burning in her chest. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock and confusion through the assembled guests. Alex's face went white. For a moment, recognition flickered in his eyes, not of who she was now, but of something. Familiar in her bearing, her voice, the way she held herself. Then confusion clouded his features as his brain struggled to reconcile the successful, powerful woman standing before him with his memories of the boring housewife he'd left behind. "Excuse me?" the officiant said, clearly flustered by this unprecedented interruption. "I said I object," Natasha repeated, walking calmly down the aisle toward the altar. Her heels clicked against the marble floor in a steady rhythm that sounded like a countdown to judgment. "I object to this ceremony proceeding under false pretenses." "Natasha." Rebecca's voice was small, confused, tinged with the first hint of fear. "What are you doing?" "I'm stopping you from making the biggest mistake of your life," Natasha replied, her eyes never leaving Alex's face. She could see him trying to process what was happening, could watch the moment when recognition finally dawned and terror replaced confusion in his expression. "This is highly irregular," the officiant protested. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to..." "To what?" Natasha turned to face him with the kind of commanding presence that made Fortune 500 executives listen when she spoke. "To let this man continue lying to everyone in this room. To let my friend marry someone who's built their entire relationship on deception." She turned back to face the altar, where Alex looked like he was about to be sick, and Rebecca was staring. Between them, with growing alarm. "Rebecca, sweetie," Natasha said, her voice gentle but implacable. "Your fiancé hasn't been entirely honest with you about his past." "What are you talking about?" Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. "I'm talking about the fact that Alexander James Stroud was married before, for 8 years, to me." The declaration hit the assembled guests like a physical blow. Gasps echoed through the space, followed by the kind of shocked murmur that rippled through crowds when something unthinkable happened in real time. That's impossible," Rebecca stammered, looking between Natasha and Alex with desperate confusion. "Alex told me he'd never been married. He said he'd never believed in marriage before meeting me. He lied," Natasha said simply, "just like he lied about having children." Alex finally found his voice, though it came out strangled and desperate. "Natasha, what are you doing here? This is crazy. You can't just what?" Natasha's voice cut through his stammering like a blade. "Can't just tell the truth? Can't just correct the lies you've been telling about our marriage, about our daughters?" She gestured toward Emma and Grace, who were now standing in their seats, both looking stunned but beginning to understand what was happening. "Daughters?" Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. "Emma and Grace Stroud," Natasha said clearly, wanting everyone in the venue to hear. "His daughters. The children he abandoned when he decided our family wasn't interesting enough for him anymore." The crowd was in full uproar now, voices rising as people tried to process what they were witnessing. Some guests were standing, craning their necks, to get a better view of the drama unfolding at the altar. Others were pulling out phones, clearly torn between documenting the moment and respecting the privacy of what was obviously a devastating personal revelation. "This is not... I never..." Alex started, then stopped, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. "Natasha, please, let's talk about this privately." "Privately?" Natasha's laugh held no humor. "Like the private way you erased our marriage from your history? Like the private way you told everyone you'd never loved anyone before Rebecca?" She turned to address the crowd directly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having rooms full of people hang on her every word. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting this lovely ceremony, but I felt you should know that the groom has been somewhat creative with his personal history. Alexander Stroud was married to me, Natasha Bigdan, from 2010 to 2018. We have 2 daughters together who are sitting right there in the 4th row." Every head turned toward Emma and Grace, who stood frozen in the spotlight of sudden attention. Emma, always the more composed of the two, lifted her chin with a dignity that reminded Natasha painfully of her own younger self. Grace moved closer to her sister, but neither girl looked away from the crowd or tried to hide. "Furthermore," Natasha continued, her voice gaining strength with each word, "I've been listening to some interesting stories about his first marriage to an unstable woman who allegedly stole his son and disappeared. I can assure you that story is complete fiction. There was no son, no disappearance, no search by private investigators. There was simply a man who grew bored with his family and decided it was easier to invent a tragic backstory than admit he'd abandoned his wife and children." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca was staring at Alex with the kind of devastated comprehension that came when everything you believed about someone crumbled in real time. "Alex," she whispered, "is this true?" Alex's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His carefully constructed facade was disintegrating, and there was no explanation smooth enough to address the living proof of his deception standing before 200 witnesses. "Rebecca, I can explain..." "Explain what?" Rebecca's voice was getting stronger, anger beginning to replace shock. "Explain how you've been lying to me for 2 years. Explain how you convinced me I was special because I was your first love when you were married to someone else for 8 years. Explain how you have children you never told me about." It wasn't like that." Alex stumbled over his words, desperation making him clumsy. "That marriage didn't count, Rebecca. It was a mistake. We were too young. It was never real like what we have." The slap echoed through the country club like a gunshot. Natasha's hand stung from the contact, but the satisfaction that flooded through her was worth every moment of pain she'd endured over the past 10 years. Alex stumbled backward, his hand flying to his reddening cheek, his eyes wide with shock and something that might have been fear. "Don't you dare," Natasha said, her voice deadly quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Don't you dare dismiss 8 years of marriage as not real while standing before the daughters we created together. Don't you dare pretend that the life we built meant nothing simply because you decided you were too good for it." She stepped closer to him, close enough that only he could hear her next words, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "I am Natasha Bigdan, CEO of Phoenix Rising Fashion. I am worth more than your entire law firm. I have graced the cover of Forbes twice, and I employ over 3,000 people worldwide. The boring woman you abandoned became everything you never believed she could be, while you remained exactly the same, a mediocre man who lies to get what he wants." She stepped back, her voice rising so everyone could hear her final words. "Rebecca deserves to know what kind of man she almost married. Everyone here deserves to know what kind of colleague and friend they've been supporting. And my daughters, deserve to have their existence acknowledged by their father, even if he's spent 10 years pretending they don't exist. The aftermath was chaos. Rebecca was sobbing, her perfect wedding day in ruins around her feet. Wedding guests were on their phones, some trying to comfort the bride, while others were clearly sharing the gossip that would be all over social media within minutes. The wedding party stood frozen in tableau, unsure whether to intervene or retreat, and Alex stood at the altar in his ruined tuxedo, his hand still pressed to his cheek where Natasha had slapped him, finally revealed for exactly what he was. A man so small and selfish that he'd erased his own children from his life story, rather than admit to having failed at anything. Natasha walked back toward her daughters with her head held high, feeling lighter than she had in 10 years. The confrontation she'd never planned was over, and the truth was finally free. "Come on, girls," she said quietly when she reached Emma and Grace. "Let's go home." As they walked toward the exit, leaving behind the ruins of Alex's carefully constructed lies, Natasha felt something she hadn't experienced since the night he'd left their kitchen: complete, uncompromising victory. The phoenix had risen indeed, and this time she'd burned down everything false in her path. Chapter 10. The Sweet Taste of Justice. 6 months after the wedding that never was, Natasha stood in the executive suite of her flagship Manhattan store, watching the morning news coverage that had become as routine as her coffee. The anchor's voice carried across the room with practiced authority as footage rolled of Phoenix Rising's latest store opening in Milan. Fashion mogul Natasha Bigdan continues her international expansion with her 16th store outside the United States. The Phoenix Rising brand has seen unprecedented growth following what media outlets dubbed the wedding confrontation that made headlines worldwide last November. Natasha smiled, muting the television with her remote. The media attention had been intense for the first month after Rebecca's wedding, but she'd learned to navigate it with the same grace that had carried her through every other challenge in her remarkable journey. The story had everything journalists loved: betrayal, redemption, a powerful woman refusing to be silenced, and enough drama to fuel months of think pieces about modern relationships and corporate accountability. "Mom, have you seen the morning sales reports?" Emma called from across the suite, where she'd set up a temporary workspace during her winter break from Colombia. She was officially Phoenix Rising's Director of Strategic Development now, having proven herself invaluable during her summer internships and part-time work throughout college. Online orders are up 68% from this time last year. That's the 4th consecutive quarter of growth exceeding 50%, Grace added, looking up from her laptop where she was editing photos for the spring campaign. At 19, she had taken a gap year before college to focus on her photography career and help document Phoenix Rising's expansion. Her images had graced the covers of 3 major fashion magazines in the past 6 months, and she'd been accepted to both Parsons and Fit for the following fall. The business had exploded beyond Natasha's wildest projections. The wedding confrontation had initially seemed like it might be a public relations nightmare, but within days it became clear that the story resonated with millions of women who saw their own struggles reflected in Natasha's journey. Sales had surged as customers rushed to support a brand that embodied authentic female empowerment, rather than just marketing it. More importantly, the attention had allowed Natasha to launch something she'd been planning for years. The Phoenix Foundation for Entrepreneurial Women. The nonprofit provided microloans, business mentorship, and emotional support to divorced women starting their own companies. In 6 months, they'd already helped over 800 women launch businesses ranging from bakeries to tech startups. "We have 3 more loan applications to review this afternoon," Zara announced, entering the suite with her arms full of folders. and her usual energy radiating determination. As Phoenix Rising's chief marketing officer and the foundation's co-director, she'd thrown herself into both roles with the passion that had first made her believe in Natasha's vision. The foundation had become deeply personal for all of them. Every application told a story similar to Natasha's. Women who'd been dismissed, undervalued, or abandoned, fighting to rebuild their lives and prove their worth. The difference was that now they didn't have to fight alone. Sarah Martinez wants to expand her catering business into event planning, Zara continued, settling into one of the leather chairs around Natasha's conference table. She's been successfully running the catering company for 2 years since her divorce, and she's ready to scale up. Maria Gonzalez is launching a consulting firm for small businesses. She has an MBA and 15 years of corporate experience that her ex-husband convinced her was worthless. And Jennifer Wu wants to open a martial arts studio specifically focused on self-defense for women. Each story was different, but the themes were heartbreakingly familiar. Women who'd been told they weren't capable, weren't smart enough, weren't worth investing in. Women who were proving every day that they were all of those things and more. Schedule the interviews for next week, Natasha decided. I want to meet all 3 of them personally. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from her assistant. Ms. Bigdan, I have Rebecca Chen on line 2. She says it's personal. Natasha felt a familiar mix of emotions. She and Rebecca had spoken several times since the wedding, conversations that were healing for both of them, though their friendship would clearly need time to fully recover. Rebecca had handled the aftermath with remarkable grace, even publicly thanking Natasha for saving her from a marriage built on lies, while also working through her own embarrassment and heartbreak in therapy. Put her through. Natasha, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Rebecca's voice came through the speaker, warmer than it had been in their early conversations, but still carrying traces of the awkwardness that probably would never completely disappear. Never too busy for you? How are you doing? Better. Much better, actually. I wanted to call because I saw the coverage of your Milan opening and I wanted you to know how proud I am of you. Not just for the business success, but for having the courage to speak up that day. I know it couldn't have been easy. Natasha closed her eyes, remembering the weight of that decision. The moment when she'd chosen truth over politeness, justice over keeping the peace. You deserve to know who you were marrying. I'm just sorry it had to happen that way. Don't be sorry. If you hadn't spoken up, I'd be married to a man who could lie to my face every single day. Rebecca's voice grew stronger. I would have spent years trying to figure out why something felt wrong. Why he seemed to have no real past. Why he never wanted to talk about his family. You saved me from that. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, touching on Rebecca's new job with a marketing firm in San Francisco and her slowly growing readiness to consider dating again. When they hung up, Natasha felt the satisfaction that came from relationships that could survive difficult truths and emerge stronger. Her afternoon was packed with the usual demands of running a growing empire, design reviews for the fall collection, meetings with potential investors interested in funding the European expansion, a video conference with the Tokyo team preparing for their grand opening. But the call that changed everything came at 4:30, just as she was preparing to leave for a foundation event. Natasha, it's Alex. Her ex-husband's voice on the phone felt like a ghost from another lifetime. She hadn't heard from him since the wedding, though she'd certainly heard about him. The law firm had quietly asked him to take early retirement after the scandal made him a liability with clients who valued discretion. His professional reputation in shambles, he'd been forced to start over with a much smaller practice, handling significantly less prestigious cases. What do you want, Alex? Her voice was steady, professional, giving away nothing of the complex emotions his call stirred up. I need to apologize for everything, for the way I left, for the lies I told about our marriage, for pretending Emma and Grace didn't exist. His voice sounded older, worn down by 6 months of consequences. I know it's too late, but I needed you to know that I was wrong. About everything. Natasha sat in silence for a moment, processing words she'd once desperately wanted to hear. 10 years ago, this apology would have meant everything to her. 5 years ago, it might have provided some sense of closure. Now, it felt almost irrelevant. A footnote to a story that had moved far beyond needing his validation. I appreciate you calling, she said finally. But I need you to understand something, Alex. I don't need your apology anymore. I don't need your acknowledgement of what I've become, or your regret about what you threw away. I needed those things once, desperately, but I built a life and a business and a sense of self-worth that doesn't require your approval. Natasha, please, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but this isn't about forgiveness, she interrupted gently. This is about the fact that your opinion of me, positive or negative, simply doesn't matter anymore. You told me I wasn't enough, and I spent 12 years proving you wrong, not to you, but to myself. The woman you dismissed as boring and worthless became everything you never imagined she could be. She paused, looking out at the city where she'd built her empire, thinking about the women she'd helped, the daughters she'd raised, the life she'd created from the ashes of their marriage. I hope you find peace, Alex. I hope you learn to be honest with yourself and the people in your life, but I don't need anything from you anymore. I never did. I just needed to remember who I was before I let someone else define my worth. After ending the call, Natasha sat quietly in her office, processing the strange anticlimax of finally hearing the words she'd once thought she needed. Emma and Grace had left for their evening plans, and Zara was at the foundation office reviewing loan applications. The building was settling into its after-hours quiet, but the Phoenix Rising workspace remained vibrant with the energy of ongoing projects and ambitious dreams. She walked through the design studio where sketches for next season's collection covered every available surface. The clothes reflected the evolution of her vision, pieces that celebrated strength without sacrificing femininity, garments that told stories of resilience and growth, designs that helped women feel powerful enough to claim their place in any room. At 25, she'd given up a scholarship to design school to become someone's wife. At 35, she'd found herself divorced and cleaning buildings to survive. At 45, she stood at the helm of a global fashion empire that employed thousands of people and inspired millions more. The greatest revenge hadn't been the public humiliation at Rebecca's wedding, satisfying though that moment had been. The greatest revenge had been becoming so magnificently successful that Alex's opinion became irrelevant, so completely fulfilled that his approval became unnecessary, so thoroughly happy that his absence felt like freedom rather than loss. Standing in her flagship store as the city lights began to twinkle outside, surrounded by the physical evidence of everything she'd built from nothing, Natasha realized the profound truth that had taken her 10 years to fully understand. She had never needed to be saved or validated or completed by anyone else. She had been enough all along. She just needed to remember it. The phoenix had risen, not just once, but continuously, transforming every challenge into an opportunity, every setback into a comeback, every ending into a new beginning. And the fire that had forged her strength would continue burning, lighting the way for every woman who needed to remember her own worth. Emma and Grace would inherit not just a business empire, but the knowledge that they were capable of building anything they could imagine. The foundation would continue helping women transform their pain into power, their struggles into success. Phoenix Rising would keep creating clothes that whispered to women, "You belong here, you matter, you are enough." And Natasha Bigdan, the girl who'd once believed love meant making herself smaller, would continue growing larger, brighter, more powerful with each passing day, a living testament to the revolutionary truth that the only approval that mattered was the kind you gave yourself. She turned off the lights and headed home, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that impossible was just another word for inevitable. The empire she'd built wasn't just made of stores and revenue and influence, it was made of self-respect, authenticity, and the unshakable knowledge that she was exactly who she'd always been meant to be. And nothing Alex or anyone else had ever said could change that truth.